cursed be the ground for our sake. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for us. For out of the ground we were taken for the dust that we are, and to the dust we shall return. The From the Dust podcast features people who have had life-changing experiences. Here they share their stories and testimonials about how God can move and change a person's life. Welcome to the From the Dust podcast. Take a listen. Open your hearts and ears. Here's your host, James Science.
Yeah. Welcome back to another edition of From the Dust podcast. Whatever you are, whatever you do, you are highly favored and highly blessed. I want to thank you for coming back. And if you're new, welcome to the show. Hope you're inspired by what you're going to hear and the stories that I have on. Today, my guest, Jeffery, descovik, is here to share his story, what he's been through. Let's go ahead and bring him in. Jeffery, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I heard some of your story, what you've been through, man, and it's a good one. And I want to thank you for sharing. And I hope my guests that are going to watch this, are going to hear this, are inspired and take it in. So let's get into it. Oh, you mind telling us where you grew up and how
Sure.
your childhood like?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Peekskill, which was a suburbs. It was a city in Peekskill, New York. It was a city in Westchester County. I'm sorry. It's a suburban area in New York, in the United States. And, just think middle class, think ethnically diverse.
Well, I know. What was your childhood like?
Pre-teenage. Well, how we define? What's the cutoff mark? Childhood up until what age?
I mean, growing up, as a kid, growing up, getting
All right,
through.
As a kid growing up, I mean, I was pretty active. I guess you could say like an all-American kid. I mean, I did things like stickball, ride bikes, play Monopoly, video games. There were a lot of kids in the apartment complex where I grew up at, and I was kind of like the life of the party in the sense that myself and one other kid, whatever we suggested would kind of be what we did, ranging from that set of activities.
Very diverse, huh?
Very diverse, yes.
Yeah, growing up, me as a kid, I was always the one that was doing all the ideas and getting my friends into things we probably shouldn't have. But hey, when you're a kid, you want to have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. For me, I mean, it was just, we weren't like doing anything illegal or anything like that. We were playing with sports and playing video games, and maybe a few things we did we shouldn't have. I mean, I should have come home, gotten in at a respectable hour instead of coming in 10 or 11 o'clock, and maybe I snuck off to the mall a couple times without my mother's permission. So it was stuff like that,
Right, and not too great, just regular kid stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I just want to add that, in my teenage years when I entered the high school. So first of all, my parents wanted me actually to go to Catholic high school, but I wanted to go to public school because all my friends were in public school, and I assumed that they would be inclined to go to the public high school. So I purposely failed the entrance exam so that I could go to the public school, and the public school was actually across the street from where I lived at. But what I didn't realize, the error I made in my calculation was that, I had been skipped a grade, really, really young. So I was thrown in the public school, but it was not with my friends. It was people that were like a year or 2 years older than I was. And so, they were more into things like keg parties and chasing girls. And I wasn't really into that, just like, they had a big emphasis on playing organized sports, and I was just more like playing pickup games. And so I never quite fit in. And so I was like withdrawn and very tight. And so in school, I had that one identity where I was kind of like on the fringes of the society. Whereas after school, I was in a different life that I've already described. And that's really important into my story as we get into it.
Now, did that have an effect on your life growing up? Were you crossed between wanting to do sports and wanting to live the life of a regular high school student, living that party life?
No, not really. I mean, I loved playing sports, but just pickup sports, not like organized, not organized. But the other thing was that, I feel like I was pretty eclectic. So I love playing like a wide range of things. I wouldn't be happy going to practice 3 or 4 or 5 days a week and just specializing in one thing. I mean, I like engaging in a wide variety of, like, one day we might be riding bikes, another one we might go swimming, or another time we might play basketball. Still another time we might play dodgeball. A different time we're going to play stickball, kickball. All these different things. One other time we might stay in and just binge out on playing Nintendo games. So I liked mixing it up rather than just playing doing one thing.
Right. So like I see that's probably what keeps you busy, right? Keeps you out of I would say the streets. Am I correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes.
Like I want to tell you the reason why we brought you on. Like, this podcast consists of like life changing stories. I had people on that were in prison, I had people that were sexually assaulted, many different backgrounds. So everyone comes in with a different story. Can we get into why we brought you on? And
yeah, 100%.
What?
Of course, that's why I'm here.
In your life?
Of course, that's why I'm here. Audience, buckle up. Have I got one hell of a story for you.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit of it, and I know what, this is different from what I had. But everyone that comes on this show has an impact on one of my listeners and viewers, and I always get feedback. And I know this is gonna have someone. It's gonna reach somebody. So, from what I'm told, you were wrongfully convicted of a crime, and you spent some time in prison. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are. I was arrested at age 16 for murder and rape, which I did not commit. I got bailed out. I turned 17. The trial commenced, and despite a negative DNA test result, I was ultimately wrongfully convicted of a murder and rape, which I did not commit. And I spent 16 years in prison prior to being exonerated. So if I can set the stage just a little bit, and this ties back into my background. So we talked about me growing up, and I mentioned just now that I was arrested at 16. And so that double life that I mentioned to you that I did directly intersects with my story. So the year was 1990, and there hadn't been a murder in Peekskill in approximately 20 years. So this created an atmosphere of fear, rumor, paranoia. Parents were concerned with their own safety as well as the safety of their children. And in high school, I was quiet. I was to myself, as I mentioned. And in the course of the police investigation, they interviewed a lot of students from the school, and some of them told the police that they might want to talk to me because I didn't fit in. So I guess the theory is people that don't fit in commit heinous crimes. So that's how I came to be on the police radar. Another thing is that this was really my first brush with death. And I was a sentimental, sensitive teenager, and I had an emotional reaction to that. And the police interpreted my reacting emotionally to the murder of this girl that I barely knew. She was in 2 of my classes as a freshman, 1 as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was the extent of it. We were not even really on a high-buy basis, but the police interpreted my being emotional as a outward sign, like I was sorry for something that I had done, which is really poor reason to suspect somebody. And just for context, I'll share, that this murder, it really shook up the whole city of Peekskill to the point that free mental health counseling was set up for anyone who wanted it, to process what had happened. So confirming or reinforcing factor was that the Peekskill police, they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of what the actual perpetrator would be like. And I had the misfortune of matching that. So it was a reinforcing factor. Before I was a teenager, the career that I fantasized about having when I grew up was I wanted to be a cop. And so for about 6 weeks, the police, they played this cat and mouse game with me where half the time they talked to me as a suspect. And then when they would push too hard and I would start to become frightened and I'd want to leave, then they would switch it up and start talking to me like they pretending they needed my help to solve the crime. So they would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear any rumors, stop in from time to time. So along with my age, 16 was my wanting to be a cop before I was a teenager, that allowed them to pull the wool over my eyes. So after about 6 weeks of that, and all of which time, by the way, my mother did not know what was going on, because I was 16 years old, and it was that age where kids start to rebel against the authority of their parents, and our parents are stupid, we know better, and so I knew my mother didn't want me to talk with the police, but I thought I knew better than her, and I figured, well, I'm innocent, I didn't do anything, I don't know anything, so, and they're acting like they want my help, so what could possibly go wrong? So my mother didn't know what was going on. Eventually, the police got me to agree to take a lie detector test, and they by telling me there was some new information in the police file that came in, and they wanted to share that with me, and that would allow me to be more helpful to them. But first, I'd have to take and pass a polygraph. So the next day, instead of going to school, I went to the police station for this test. So my mother and grandmother, whom I live with, they thought I was in school. So they drove me to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County, so about 40 minutes away by car, which meant that I was not able to leave on my own anymore. I was dependent upon the police. There were 3 cops that came with me from Peekskill to Brewster, but then there was also the polygraphist, who was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he was dressed like a civilian, and he never identified himself as an officer. He never read me my rights. I had no attorney present. I wasn't given anything to eat the entire time I was there. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it, and I didn't understand what they meant. But then I thought, since I'm there to help the police, what did it matter? Let's just get on with it. So from there, they put me in a small room and gave me countless cups of coffee. It seems pretty clear in hindsight the purpose of that was to get me nervous. And from there, they just launched into their third degree. He launched into his third degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And as each hour passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time. On top of that, I was really at a disadvantage because my father was never involved in my life in any capacity. So I really wasn't used to talking to adult males, much less one who was conducting himself like this polygraphist was. And so he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, he made a statement. He said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And so that really frightened me. And that's when the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, that he had been holding them off but could not do so indefinitely, that I was going to have to help myself. Then he added, if I just told them what they wanted to hear, I could go home, that I was not going to be arrested. Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term. I was only concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life because the fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else knew where I was either loomed very large in my mind. And then there was also this push-pull dynamic, because on one hand, the possibility of harm had been suggested, and on the other hand, he had threw me this false life preserver. By the time it was all finished, I was curled up into a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Needless to say, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape. That's when a DNA test result came in from the FBI lab, and it showed that semen found in the victim didn't match me. But instead of acknowledging they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute me. The prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud. He got him to claim that he had forgotten to document 6 months ago that he found medical evidence showing that the victim, a 15-year-old immigrant from Colombia who had been in the country for about 1.5 years, leading a pretty sheltered life. She really never went anywhere unless she was with her parents or her older sister. He claimed that he had found evidence to show that she had been sleeping around, which is what allowed the prosecutor to argue that it didn't matter that the DNA didn't match me. She had slept with yet another person before I had supposedly murdered and raped her. Taking it a step further, he mentioned another youth by name that he claimed had the encounter with her, but he never had him testify to that. He never had a DNA test result performed on that. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. And lastly, the last part of this I'll mention is my public defender essentially didn't defend me. He never introduced my alibi. He rarely met with me. When he did meet with me and I tried to explain I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he claimed he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. Another thing is that he never cross-examined. He never tried to discredit this medical examiner. He should have never represented me, because this youth that the prosecution was falsely claiming had slept with the victim was represented by another member of legal aid, the public defender's office. And so that prevented us from calling him as a witness. It prevented us from asking him for a DNA sample. And then he wouldn't allow me to testify there either. So the cops, they left the threat and false promise out of their story. So the interrogation was not video or audio taped. It was just their word. There was no signed confession. It was just their word for it. So they left that part out. And ultimately, I was wrongfully convicted and given a 15 to life sentence.
I heard this a lot, Rowan. These are some of the things that upset me, because innocent people are blamed for someone else's crimes. Do you believe that they had solid proof someone else did it, but this seemed to be a case where they just want to shut it and close it? Am I correct? No matter.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. They were just trying to act like they solved the case. But what was tragic about it, and I'll skip down the line a little bit. What was tragic about that was that the actual perpetrator left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed a second victim 3.5 years later, who had 2 children and was a school teacher.
Yeah, man. Sometimes the justice system is not what it's meant to be, and they just do things where they cause more harm than they do good. And there's some good out there, but in this case, it was totally wrong, and I don't agree with it. Going to prison, what was that like for you? Because we don't always hear about innocent victims going. We don't hear the side, how it is in prison for them. What was that like for you, a life in prison?
Yeah, I would describe it as a nonstop obstacle course featuring the guards, civilians, and other prisoners, all as obstacles to the main goal, which was to overturn the conviction, regain my freedom. Prison's very violent. It was very dangerous. I was sent to a men's maximum security prison since I had been charged as an adult. What am I going to do against a 17-year-old weighing 150 pounds against fully grown adults? On top of that, I had the bullseye on my back because I had been convicted of a sex offense, the rape with the murder, and that's vigilante mentality towards people who've been convicted of sex offenses. So at times I was beat up. Over the years, one time I almost lost my life. So it was very difficult. I had to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, thoughts of suicide. I really, it was really a miracle from God, just the fact that I survived. My belief in God was one of the factors that allowed me to keep going. So there was that. I believed in my innocence, and I naively thought that the justice system got better as you went up higher in the court system. So in my mind, I lived for 16 years. I lived from appeal to appeal, just focusing in on the next appeal, which would be in a year or two, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent. I found things to throw myself in mentally. I read nonfiction books, and, I studied the law, and I read stories about other people that had been exonerated, and I used that as motivation to keep going. So all those, even in my own mind, I engaged in this elaborate delusion at times. I played basketball and chess and ping pong in prison, and I couldn't deal with being in prison. And so I engaged in this elaborate delusion where I would pretend like I was a professional player, and so were the other prisoners, and the people waiting for next, that was the audience. And, the gym was a road game and the other place was home. But it really wasn't like kids fantasizing about being an athlete. This was more like a defense mechanism. Like I needed to survive. I needed to get out of there. I listen to sports radio, but it wasn't listening to sports radio. It was a lifeline to the outside. It was a connection to the outside, and you try to normalize madness and pretend like the only way to have a phone call is if you call correct, or that it's normal to be strip searched as the price for getting a visit. And it's not the prison guards, it's the correction officers, and it's not the prison warden, it's the superintendent.
What? And you got to be strong, because I don't think myself or my mind would be able to take so much stress. What that do to you mentally? What kind of effect did it have on you?
Well, the same effects that it has had for other exonerees, which is we have, we get post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, anxiety, feeling of processing things at a slower speed, a feeling of having been frozen in time. So all those are after effects that have to be dealt with. But it was a particularly difficult transition for me because remember, I was in prison from age 17 to 32, so those are the developmental years. So when I reintegrated, I had to I did things I never had done before. I had to get a driver's license, and I had never lived alone before and paid bills or write a check or balance a budget, and I had to learn all those things. So that was really difficult, and technology had passed me by, and I basically did the time by myself. I mean, I had a couple sets of aunts and uncles that came and they would visit then disappear for 3 years, visit and disappear. My grandmother passed while I was inside. I saw my younger brother 3 times in 16 years, not at all in the last decade. And the last 6 years, I was lucky if I saw my mother once or twice a year.
It took a good chunk out of your life, and also through it. I know you, the way you were speaking and talking, you didn't give up hope, and you didn't give up faith.
No.
And you're out. What your fight? And did you get help? What brought you out? What got you free? What got you exonerated?
Yes. So while I was in prison, I was appealing my conviction, and I lost 7 appeals. And then I wrote letters for 4 years looking for help. And your appeals are exhausted, they don't give you a lawyer anymore, and because they figure you're not litigating. The only way back into court when your appeals are over is if you can find some previously unknown evidence of innocence that probably would have resulted in something different. So I wrote letters for 4 years looking for help. Ultimately, it was a miracle from God, because I wrote a book publishing. I wrote a book author and care the publishing company. She had wrote her memoirs of when she had been a warden of a men's maximum security prison. So I thought, well, this is a person that her walk of life would have lent itself to her meeting somebody who could help me, because I needed someone to find new evidence. And I sent the letter to that publishing company, but instead of sending it to the author, that publishing company sent it instead to an investigator. And the investigator, when I explained the DNA evidence not matching me, and I proved that, she became convinced of my innocence. So she gave me the winning idea. She suggested I write the Innocence Project again, a nonprofit organization in Manhattan and New York. And then that frees wrongfully convicted people in cases where DNA evidence can demonstrate innocence. So she gave me that idea. She lobbied them. She got other respected legal entities to lobby them. Here's where a second miracle from God comes in, because the Innocence Project, they didn't want to take my case. There was an intake worker who was not a lawyer, and every time the lawyers told her no, she went back to the drawing board and came up with a new theory as to how the DNA could be used to constitute something new, remembering that the DNA didn't match me before at the trial. So she presented my case 3 times before she got them to accept it. So getting their legal representation was the first thing. And I want to also add, just on the survival morale level, which is all part of this, I placed an ad in a local newspaper, in a random newspaper in Sacramento, California. And someone wrote me back that had been a crime victim, and he came just in the nick of time, because I was at the end of my rope, and I was openly asking him in my letters, you think I should just quit? Should I give up? Should I just go ahead and commit suicide? And, and he was encouraging me not to. So, another blessing from God right there. So getting the representation was the first key. The second thing is the district attorney who had fought all of my appeals and blocked me from DNA testing, she left office. And her successor was not as dug in, and she was willing to allow me to get to further testing. And the third thing is we got lucky that the actual perpetrator had committed that second crime and gotten caught for that, which resulted in his DNA being put in the data bank, so that when I did get the testing, it matched him. and then confronted with that evidence, he admitted he was the person who had committed the crime. So my charges were, my conviction was overturned September 22nd, 2006. And I went back to court November 2nd, 2006. And all the charges at that point were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. And the actual perpetrator was arrested and charged for the crime.
What a journey. What a fight. The feeling of knowing when you heard the news, how did you feel?
Well, my lawyer told me that I'm going. Well, she told me, she came to see me the day before I got out, and she said, "Well, you know, the items have been tested," and I said to her, "Well, what are you talking about? They're not supposed to be tested for another 6 weeks." And she said, "No, the DA pulled a few strings and they expedited the testing, and it matched the actual perpetrator. You're going home tomorrow." And I said to her, "No, I'm not." And we went back and forth 3 times, and you know, I just was in this mental paralysis for maybe 3.5 hours. And I just was talking to her about all these random things. And one subject had nothing to do with the next. My head was spinning. And every now and then she would check in with me and she would say, "Are you ready to talk about tomorrow?" And I'm like, no, just keep that away from me. That's not going to happen. Because by that point, I was afraid to hope, because it hurts when you get turned down. It's like being wrongfully convicted all over again. So eventually at the end, she said, "Look, I need to get your sizes, get a suit, shoes. There's a ton of work to do." And that's really what made it real for me. Of course, then a different fear entered my mind, which was that I thought something was going to happen between that day and the next, where the district attorney was going to change her mind and I was going to be stuck.
I think it had to be all that, the years of hearing the no and
Yes.
happening. It played with your head, but you were in a state of shock, I believe, right?
Absolutely. Yes, that's true.
When you walked out, what was that like, having spent so many years in prison and finally walking out of those gates and knowing you were a free man?
So when I walked out, I went. So they took me from the prison to the court, and then they released me from the court. And we had a press conference, and my first words when it was time to speak was, I just said, "Is this really happening?" Because I wasn't entirely sure that it really was happening. That I hadn't simply hallucinated. I finally lost my mind, and I thought I was going to wake up and see the cell bars and still be in prison.
And imagine, if we can, whatever came of these prosecutors and cops, did they ever deal with the consequences?
Hold on 1 second. I'm just give me what's.
Wow, what a story! Hopefully, he comes back soon. But what a story!
All right, sorry. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. Yeah. So it was a feeling of being. It didn't hit me. My first words actually were, "Is this really happening?"
Well, did the prosecutors, detectives, anybody involved with this wrongful conviction, were they dealt with? What came of them?
No, nobody ever suffered any repercussions. I mean, I did file lawsuits, but that was paid by the municipalities that they worked for. But nobody was ever sanctioned, not civilly, not criminally, not in any way.
And if truthfully, what do you feel towards them? What is your thoughts with that?
Well, honestly, I don't think about them. I don't feel anything about them. I mean, my first week I was angry. But at the end of that week, I realized that, I can't be angry. This is destroying me. And I felt like, I wanted to enjoy my life as much as I can. And I don't think I can do that if I'm angry or bitter. Another thing is that, I feel like I lost so much. Why would I want to, in effect, give them the rest of my life? And another thing also is that, it's not like if I was angry or bitter that it would negatively impact them. I would be the only loser in that. And, and the vehicle that allows me to actualize that is I take that energy and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do.
And you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So, I was an individual advocate for about 5 years. I engaged in speaking across the country, and I was doing a lot of media interviews, basically trading privacy for awareness to hope shed more light on the issues. The idea of trying to promote legislation to prevent what happened to me from happening to other people. I was a columnist for 5 years at a weekly newspaper. And I was regularly meeting with elected officials and going to legislative hearings where they were considering criminal justice reform bills. So after about, so here's another blessing from God is, I was about 2 weeks away from being in a homeless shelter. I had lost the temporary housing, and then Mercy College, which had offered me a scholarship to finish the bachelor's degree, because while I was in prison, I got the GED. I completed the 2 years. I got the associates, and I completed another year towards the bachelor's before the funding was cut. So the dean at Mercy College, she lined up a scholarship for me at the school, and then she approached me, and so that was kind of like an intervention, because I thought I was too old to go to college at that point, but she made me the offer, and so I did it just to do it, and I was able to springboard from that, finish the bachelor's to get a master's degree. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction, cause, and reform, and then I got another degree, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But to circle back, Mercy College, which gave me that scholarship, which included the meal plan, because they release you without anything. There's no reentry help for people that are exonerated. But when I lost the temporary housing, the college allowed me to live on campus. And so that's how I avoided the shelter. So after about 5 years, I was able to get some financial compensation, and I wanted to take my advocacy work to the next level. So I started the Jeffery Descovik Foundation for Justice, whose purpose is to free wrongfully convicted people. And I used some of the money that I got to start the organization. And, we've been able to free 7 people. We were able to change 3 laws aimed at wrongful conviction prevention. So videotaping interrogations, better identification procedures, DNA database expansion. Then working through a bigger coalition, which I'm an advisory board member of, and which my foundation is part of, called It Could Happen to You. We were able to pass a few more laws in New York. So sharing information between the defense and prosecution, and an oversight board for the prosecutors. So somewhere along the line, I decided that I wasn't content anymore to sit in the front row in the courtroom, even if the lawyer was an employee or was otherwise collaborating with us. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table and make some of the arguments. And so I decided to go. I went to law school, and I graduated last May, and I actually just got admitted to the bar. So I actually am an attorney right now as of the 26th of October. And I wanted to share that recently we were able to free another client, Andrew Krivak, who was in prison for 24 years, framed by the same polygraphers who did it to me, did it to Andy. But the reason why I do all of this, advocacy work, and I'm working, and the coalition's working, the foundation, we're working in 3 states, New York, Pennsylvania, California, on the legislative end. And, we have 12 active cases in New York, where we're going to bring home between, 2 to 12 people, God willing, in the next year that are wrongfully imprisoned. So what motivates me is, I make sense of everything. I consider that my mission in life is to fight wrongful conviction. And that's how I make sense of everything. That's why I think why I went through everything, that I did. So, I'm just trying to, walk that walk and live a life that's pleasing to God, and do my mission as best as I can. And so that's allowed me to come to a sense of inner peace, and, I feel comfortable in my own skin. And
I love how what you went through. You could have been bitter and angry, but you turned it around, and you actually are fighting for, the innocent. I admire that, man. That takes a lot. It takes a lot. Where can we find any of your work? If you have a website or?
Sure, we have a website. It's www.descovik, DESKOVIC.org. Beyond that, the foundation does have a YouTube channel. So Descovik Foundation is hundreds of videos of different interviews, presentations, and other works where I'm involved in. But in addition to that, so there's a short documentary called Conviction about my advocacy work, my story and life after exoneration. Is available on Amazon Prime, and that was shot by Gia Wirtz, who, of course, connected you and I. So people can go to Amazon and put Conviction in there and watch it. And we're in process now of expanding the documentary to make it an hour and a half. But that's another thing where you can see where our work is. And I have a Facebook page too. I have a public figure page. People can type in Jeffery Descovik and follow my work. I regularly post my published writings and upcoming speaking engagements and other advocacy. But I get a lot of meaning. I get a lot of meaning out of what I do.
I would think so, man. It sounds like you're very genuine about what you do. And you have a passion for it, and I admire that. Before we let my guests go, I always give them opportunity to someone that's listening or is going to do this, or hopefully a family member that are going through the same thing you're going through. What are the steps? What can you tell them to some kind of faith, hope to get through it? And what can they do to make those steps to, turn this around and get that help?
Sure. I would say go to the law library and learn the law. I would, which I did. I would collect articles about other people who are exonerated, and that way that keeps you going morale-wise. You have to put like a really short, nice and tight letter together. When you're looking for help, my name is so-and-so, and I'm innocent. I'm wrongfully in prison of such and such. I've spent this much time in prison. Here's my sentence. Then the evidence against me was X, Y, Z. This is what was flawed in the evidence. Then reference your best 2 or 3 facts that support your innocence, and then you change gears. The reason I'm writing you is I don't have any money to hire an attorney or investigator. I'm hoping that you can help me with that. Either provide the service directly, or you can help me network. So having a nice and tight letter. See, people think that the more they write, that the better chance it is, but it's the opposite. So, having that tight letter, sending it around, just don't, send it to as many places as you can. Don't give up. That's a big part of it. Focus in on your goal of overturning the conviction, regaining your freedom. Don't get caught up into the prison politics. Nothing in there really is important. It's all about trying to come back, get back to the society. So those would be the tips. And then I want to add, when you come home, someone helped you. Someone helped you. That means you got to pay it forward. You take that initial 5 minutes of fame that they give you and parlay that, keep it going as long as you can, and talk about wrongful conviction in general and work for change and meet with the electeds and do what I do. Collaborate with me, if you will, or even do other organizations around the country. But, don't forget and use that platform. Don't be content to just fade back into society, just trying to just blend in. No, you have a story. Now you have a mission, and that platform, it's a gift. God wants you to use your talents. He don't want you to, bury them in the ground and no one can see it. So that's why I do the work that I do, because it would be such a waste to not share my story, to not be part of change, to not try to prevent this from other people, to not try to free people, and other people. I've seen people who do what I'm saying, and I've seen many others that don't. And to me, the right choice is clear. I mean, everyone has the right to choose what they want, but the better action, the higher calling, that meaning, is in doing this advocacy work.
Wow, what a story, and what a life, what a fight. Some people would have gave it long ago, but you still had the hope and that faith to keep going, and that's what brought you out of it, man. Any last words before we go?
I do. Just the message I want to give people that are not in a situation, but just, other lessons can be drawn from me, which is, set goals. Look, you're never too old to go to college. I naively thought that. And, I entered law school at age 44. So, that was a dream to be a lawyer. I did fulfill that. So you're not too old to, go to college. Whatever your goals are, look, set goals, have a realistic path to get there, be flexible enough to change the change the route. Remember, the goal is the goal. The route's not the goal. Don't be afraid of hard work. And if you put in the time and the effort, somewhere along the line, that right door is going to open for you. There are no excuses. Just there are reasons why something may be hard, but there are no excuses as to why it can't be done. And never give up. So that would be one message for people I'd give generally. And maybe the last thing, and I'll end with this, is that I appreciate the small things. Like I enjoy just feeling fresh air and the sun on my face, and freedom of movement, and the opportunities that exist, being free. So many people, myself included, before this all happened to me, I took all those things for granted, but I know it doesn't have to be that way. So just taking appreciation in the small things, I think, is very very important. So no matter what your difficult circumstances, you can overcome it. And I would encourage people, whatever really you've come through something extreme, when you've overcome, think about reaching back and helping those that were left behind from that particular situation, whether that's leaving an abusive relationship, or you escape an oppressive regime, whatever you escape drug addiction, or you made a successful transition back into society after you did time for a crime you did commit, and now you want to head other people off from going down that route, or help them transition. Whatever it is, the generalities of my story can be applied to what you do, and I try to be an example in that way. And then while it's a blessing to do this, and in a way it's an example, at the same time, I don't have an ego. My head is the right size. My feet are on the ground. And look, I'm not doing nothing that anyone else couldn't do if they just decided to, apply themselves. So everybody can make an impact in the world. And don't you want to leave this place better than what we found it? I mean, that's my goal. And I just wish there are a lot of people doing that, but I wish we had even more people doing that.
Definitely. Well, Jeffrey, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing. I'll be sure to set all the links in the description. If you have a story or testimony you want to share, go ahead and hit From the Dust podcast at outlook.com. That's From the Dust podcast at outlook.com. Stories need to be told, and voices need to be heard.
Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. All things are passed away. Behold, all things become new.
Y'all be blessed. Yeah. See you again on the Dust Podcast. Wow, what a story.